Today we're going to be simplifying roots of negative numbers. Alright, so before starting with the exercises, first we have to know what is the imaginary number, right? So the imaginary number is written with the letter I, right? And its value is the square root of -1, right? So that's all we have to know to solve these exercises, right? So let's start with A. We have A, which is equal to the square root of -48. Now, if we take a look at this root, we see something strange, right? We see that there's a negative number inside the root, right? So if we want to simplify this root, we have to get rid of that negative number, right? So by applying some roots properties, we can split this root into two different roots, which are the square root of -1 times the square root of 48, right? And again, we said that the square root of -1 is I, right? And we end up with the square root of 48. So now all we have to do is simplify the square root of 48, right? So now if we simplify the square root of 48, we're going to end up with, let me see, so we divide by 2, we end up with 24 by 2, 12, 2, 6, and 2, 3, right? So we get that that's equal to 3 times 2 squared times 2 squared, right? So we end up with I times 4 the square root of 3, right? So yeah, the solution would be I times 4 square root of 3, or it can also be written as 4I square root of 3. Alright, now let's move on to the second exercise. Let's do B. So for B, exactly the same thing, right? We have the square root of -80, and again we have a negative number inside the root, right? So we have to get rid of that negative number by splitting it into two roots, right? The square root of -1 times the square root of 80, right? So now we said that the square root of -1 is I, and then times the square root of 80. So all we have to do is simplify 80. If we simplify 80, we get, let me see, let's see, we have 80 divided by 2, that's 40, divided by 2, 20, divided by 2, 10, divided by 2, 5. So we have 5 times 2 squared times 2 squared, right? So we end up with I times 4 again, square root of 5, right? So again, the solution would be 4I square root of 5, right? Now for C, we have the square root of -50, right? And again, the same thing. Since we have this negative number inside the root, we have to get rid of that negative number. So we split it, and we end up with the square root of -1 times the square root of 50. That's equal to I, and then 50 is the same as 25 times 2, right? 25 times 2. So we get that this is equal to I times 5 square root of 2, right? So yeah, the solution will be 5I square root of 2. Finally, we have D, which is the square root of -75, right? And when we split it into the square root of -1 times the square root of 75. This is I, and then we have the square root of 75. So 75 divided by 5, we get 15, divided by 5, we get 3. So this is the same as 3 times 5 squared. So we end up with I times 5 square root of 3, right? Which is the same as 5I square root of 3, right? And that's all for today. Thank you for watching.